In 1947, a shepherd boy threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea. What he found inside would shake the foundations of biblical prophecy. Those ancient scrolls contain predictions that scholars are now watching unfold in real time. 3 specific events have already happened. The 4th one is different. It involves every nation on earth simultaneously. And according to the timeline hidden in those texts, we're closer to it than most people realize. The Dead Sea Scrolls weren't just religious artifacts. Among them was the complete book of Isaiah, dating back more than 2,000 years. This matters because Isaiah contains one of the most specific geopolitical prophecies ever recorded. And it's already partially fulfilled in ways that defy statistical probability. Here's what makes this unsettling. And the prophecy outlined a sequence, not vague predictions, but a specific order of events involving nations, borders, and power shifts. When scholars first translated these texts, they assumed the predictions were metaphorical. Then 1948 happened. Israel became a nation again after 2,000 years of not existing. No other civilization in human history has disappeared for 20 centuries and then reconstituted itself with the same name, same language, and same geographic identity. The mathematical odds of this happening naturally sit somewhere near impossible. But that was just the first domino. The second domino fell so quietly that most people missed it entirely, and it involved a city that had been fought over for 3,000 years, finally ending up in the hands the prophecy said it would be in. Jerusalem has been conquered 88 times throughout recorded history. Babylonians, Romans, Persians, Crusaders, Ottomans, everyone wanted it. For nearly 2,000 years, it remained under foreign control. Then in 1967, during a war that lasted 6 days, something shifted. Israel took control of Jerusalem's old city. The biblical prophecies in Zechariah and Luke specifically mention Jerusalem being trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. For centuries, that's exactly what happened. Foreign powers controlled it. Then suddenly, they didn't anymore. This isn't about politics or taking sides. This is about pattern recognition. The prophecy said there would be a specific sequence. The nation returns, then the city, then something else. That third something is where things get interesting and controversial. The third domino involves a structure that hasn't existed for nearly 2,000 years. And whether people realize it or not, preparations for it are already underway. But before we get to that, we need to understand what the Bible says happens when all these pieces align. The book of Daniel describes a vision, a statue with different materials representing different kingdoms: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. Historians and scholars have tracked how these materials corresponded to actual empires: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then something fragmented. That final phase, the iron mixed with clay, describes nations that are strong individually but don't stick together well. Sound familiar? We live in the clay and iron age. Powerful nations, fragile alliances, constant realignments. The European Union, NATO, and BRICS nations are strong on paper, fragmented in practice. The prophecy said this fragmentation wouldn't last forever. Something would come that forces unity, not through diplomacy, but through necessity. Daniel's vision ends with a stone cut without hands that strikes the statue and becomes a mountain filling the whole earth. Ancient interpreters understood this as a kingdom that wouldn't be established by human effort. It would disrupt the existing order completely. Here's where it connects to what we're seeing now. The prophecy doesn't describe a gradual transition. It describes an abrupt shift, a moment when the current system gets replaced entirely. And there are specific signs that precede it. 3 of those signs have already materialized. The 4th one is different because it doesn't happen in one location. It happens everywhere at once. This is where things get uncomfortable for some people. Multiple prophecies reference a temple in Jerusalem during the end times, not the first temple Solomon built. not the second one Herod renovated. A third one. For this to make sense, you need context. The first temple was destroyed in 586 BC. The second one was destroyed in 70 AD. Since then, nothing. For nearly 2,000 years, there's been no temple. According to biblical prophecy, there needs to be one more. Here's what most people don't know. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has already reconstructed over 70 temple implements. Exact replicas based on biblical specifications. They've trained priests from the Levitical line. They've woven the priestly garments using the precise dyes and techniques described in ancient texts. They've even identified the location where the altar should stand. The only thing stopping construction is politics, not preparation. The Temple Mount is the most contested piece of real estate on the planet. Building a temple there would trigger immediate international crisis. Yet the prophecy indicates it will happen, and when it does, it starts a countdown. But the temple isn't the global shift. It's the trigger for what comes after. Revelation describes a future system where 10 kings or kingdoms give their authority to a single power, not through conquest, but through agreement. They voluntarily surrender their sovereignty. For centuries, this seemed absurd. Nations don't just hand over power willingly. Then the 21st century happened. The global financial crisis of 2008 showed how interconnected everything had become. One nation's collapse threatened everyone. The pandemic of 2020 demonstrated how quickly nations will surrender individual sovereignty when faced with a perceived global threat. Travel bans, coordinated lockdowns, synchronized economic policies, things that would have been impossible to coordinate 30 years ago, happened in weeks. The infrastructure for global governance already exists. The World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations. These aren't conspiracy theories. They're actual functioning organizations that nations already defer to under certain conditions. The prophecy doesn't require something new to be built. It just requires the right crisis to activate what's already there. And here's the critical detail most people miss. The biblical prophecy doesn't describe this system as inherently evil. It describes it as temporary and ultimately unsuccessful. It's presented as humanity's final attempt to solve global problems without divine intervention. And according to the timeline, it doesn't last long. The prophecy gives it 42 months, 3.5 years. That's the window between the global shift and what comes after. Let's map what we know. Israel exists. Check. Jerusalem under Israeli control. Check. Temple preparations underway. Check. Global governance infrastructure in place. Check. What's missing is the catalyst, the event that makes nations willingly surrender sovereignty to a unified system. The Bible offers several possibilities. Ezekiel 38 describes a northern coalition attacking Israel, resulting in a supernatural intervention so obvious that nations acknowledge it. Daniel describes a charismatic figure who confirms a covenant with many for 7 years, but breaks it halfway through. Revelation describes economic chaos so severe that no one can buy or sell without a specific mark. These aren't separate events. They're describing the same sequence from different angles. And the trigger point appears to involve Israel in a position of extreme vulnerability, followed by an unexpected rescue. That rescue becomes the credibility platform for whoever brokers the peace deal that follows. Think about current events, regional tensions, nuclear capabilities in unstable hands. Economic systems are increasingly digital and centralized. The ability to restrict access to financial systems already exists. We saw it deployed against Russia in 2022. Social credit systems already function in some nations. Central bank digital currencies are in development across multiple continents. None of this requires sci-fi technology. It's all here now. The question isn't capability anymore. It's willingness. What would make populations accept it? History suggests the answer is simple: fear and convenience. The same reason people surrendered privacy for smartphones. Here's where biblical scholars disagree. Some interpret the prophecies as symbolic representations of spiritual truths, not literal events. Others see them as explicitly predictive. The debate has raged for centuries, but there's one detail both sides struggle with: the precision of what's already happened. The prophet Daniel gave a specific timeline: 70 weeks of years, 490 years total. 69 of those weeks would pass from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince. That's 483 years. Using the Persian decree from Artaxerxes in 445 BC and accounting for the prophetic year of 360 days, the math lands you at 33 AD. The exact window when Jesus entered Jerusalem and was crucified. That kind of precision isn't vague symbolism. It's math. And if the first 69 weeks were literal, the final week probably is too. That final week, 7 years, is described as split in half. 3.5 years of peace, followed by 3.5 years of chaos. The midpoint is when the leader who brokered the peace commits what Daniel calls the abomination of desolation in the temple, which means the temple must exist for that to happen. Which means we're waiting on one thing: the construction announcement. When that happens, the clock starts, and based on how quickly nations mobilize during recent global events, 3.5 years isn't very long. The prophecies don't describe a sudden apocalypse out of nowhere. They describe a transition that looks like progress initially: peace in the Middle East, economic stability, a leader who seems to have solutions. The shift happens because people want it to happen. It looks like relief, not tyranny. That's what makes it effective. The biblical warnings aren't about a cartoonish villain twirling a mustache. They're about a system that seems so reasonable, so necessary, so beneficial, that refusing it marks you as the problem, as dangerous, as the enemy of progress and peace. Revelation describes people who dwell on the earth versus those who don't align with the system. The language suggests two groups: those who fully invested in the earthly system and those who maintain a different allegiance. The conflict isn't military at first. It's economic and social. Exclusion from commerce, from society, from participation. And here's the disturbing part: the majority supports it. The prophecy describes those outside the system as the minority, the outcasts, the ones everyone else views as the obstacle to peace and prosperity. But the prophecy also describes how this ends, and it's not with the global system succeeding. The final image in Daniel's vision is that stone, the kingdom not made by human hands, crushing the statue and filling the earth. The global system doesn't evolve into something better. It gets replaced entirely, not reformed. Replaced, which means everyone preparing for the shift is preparing for the wrong thing. The shift isn't the end. It's the setup. The biblical timeline doesn't end with human government finally getting it right. It ends with the human government being interrupted. And if the pattern holds, if the precision that gave us Israel, Jerusalem, and the exact year of Christ's entry continues, then the question isn't whether the global shift happens. The question is what you do when everyone around you thinks it's the solution. And while the ancient texts say it's the last attempt before something else entirely takes over. The Isaiah scroll that the shepherd boy found predicted Israel's return. It also predicted what comes after the return. We're watching the middle chapters unfold. The final ones haven't been written into history yet, but according to the text, they're already written.